Cold blood in Wisconsin. It was the winter of 1967 in Wisconsin, the kind of winter that settled into the bones of the land and stayed there. Snow covered the fields and clung to the roofs of farmhouses. Roads were narrow, carved by plows, edges soft and uncertain, leading from one small town to the next. In towns like these, people knew each other. They knew who you married, how many children you had, what kind of truck you drove, and whether you showed up to church on Sunday. Strangers were rare, and when they came, they stood out. People remembered. The Christiansen family lived on the edge of such a town, a quiet farmhouse not far from the woods. They were the kind of family you'd notice without trying. A strong father, a mother who carried warmth in her voice, children who filled the place with noise. They were not rich, but they were steady. They had cows to milk, chores to run, school mornings and dinners where the steam of potatoes rose in the air. It was life as most families wanted it, steady, safe, predictable. The children were three. Two boys, older, who had started to test the edges of childhood, wanting to be men sooner than they should, and a girl, younger, whose world was still small and bright. They lived in a house that smelled of wood smoke and stew, a house that stood like a safe post against the cold. But the truth is, safety is sometimes only a feeling, and feelings can lie. On December nights, when the air was sharp and the ground cracked beneath boots, most of the town went early to bed. There wasn't much else to do. Lights from farmhouses glowed like islands in the dark. Dogs barked, then fell quiet. Cars were few. The world beyond the edge of town could feel like a void. And it was in that void that a figure moved. Someone who did not belong. Someone who had been watching. Later, when police reports were written and neighbors whispered in kitchens, the question everyone asked was the same. Why this family? Why here? There were no enemies, no debts, no reason that anyone could name. But predators don't always need reasons that make sense to others. Sometimes it is chance. Sometimes it is obsession. Sometimes it is simply cruelty looking for a place to land. That night, the Christiansens prepared for bed as always. Ellen tucked her daughter in, smoothed the blanket, kissed her cheek. Harold checked the back door, the locks, the stove. The boys argued in their room until their voices softened into sleep. The house, like so many others across the state, settled into its night rhythm. The ticking of pipes, the groan of wind, the silence of snow falling outside. No one inside could have known that these would be their last ordinary moments. The first sign came, not to the family, but to a neighbor. A dog barking, wild in the distance. Then silence. Later, the sound of a car engine, faint, muffled, stopping where no one expected a car to stop. But in small towns, people let such things pass. A dog, a car, these did not sound like death. They sounded like life going on, as it always had. The intruder moved quickly. He had thought about this night, even if he hadn't told anyone. He knew the layout of the house. He knew where to go first. Some said later that he had watched for weeks, that he had stood in the tree line and seen the glow of the kitchen light, the shapes moving inside. Some said he had read about other murders, that he wanted to see if he could do the same. Others thought he was simply broken, carrying a rage too heavy to contain. What is certain is this. He entered, and within minutes the house of warmth and noise became a house of terror. Harold tried to fight, but he was overpowered. Ellen tried to shield the children, but she was struck down. The children woke to confusion, to sounds that made no sense. In small towns, death is supposed to come with old age, in a bed, with family gathered close. Not like this, not with blood on the floor and screams in the dark. By morning, silence. The kind of silence that doesn't belong in a house where children live.
No one knew yet. The sun rose, gray over the fields. Smoke rose from other chimneys, neighbors stirring to life, unaware. It would be hours before someone knocked on the Christiansens' door and found it open, hours before the horror spilled out into the town. When it did, the shock was complete. Police cars gathered, their red lights flashing against snow. Reporters came, their breath white in the cold, notebooks open, faces hard. The sheriff, a man who had known Harold since school, walked the yard with disbelief written in the set of his jaw. Families gathered outside, whispering. Some cried. Some crossed themselves. None of them could understand. In a town where everyone thought they knew everyone, the question was not only who had done this, but how such a thing could happen at all. The Christiansens were gone, and with them a sense of safety. The house stood, but what it had meant was broken. And the darkness that had come in the night did not vanish with the sunrise. It lingered, heavy, like a shadow across the town.
The Christiansen farmhouse did not empty quickly. When word spread, people came. They came with coats pulled tight, hats low against the cold, boots crunching over snow. They stood outside in clusters, their breath rising like smoke. Some came to help, some to see, some because they couldn't stay away. In a small town, tragedy was not private. It belonged to everyone. Deputies moved in and out of the house, their faces grim. They carried notebooks but wrote little. Some stood still too long, staring at walls, at door frames, at stains they could not unsee. A photographer was called in, his flash breaking the gloom of the rooms. The sound of it was sharp, unnatural, like a spark in a cave. Every corner of the home was documented. Every mark was measured. Still, nothing added up. The sheriff, a man named Larson, knew the family well. He had eaten supper at their table once, years before, when his own car had broken down on the road and Harold had given him a ride home. Now he stood in that same kitchen, staring at a plate left on the counter, and his stomach turned. He was not only an officer of the law, he was a neighbor, a friend. He felt the weight of that in his chest. By noon, the state investigators had arrived. They brought order, or tried to. They set up cordons, pushed the townsfolk back, ordered deputies to guard the door. They spoke in low voices, clipped words, as if efficiency might keep the horror at bay. They asked for lists, who had enemies, who had debts, who had been seen near the house. But the lists were short. No enemies, no debts, only silence. Reporters came next, their cars nosing down the narrow road, tires spitting snow. They carried cameras, pads, typewriters in cases. They leaned on each other for warmth, asked questions the townsfolk didn't want to hear. Was there trouble in the marriage? Did Harold owe money? Did Ellen have another man? The townspeople bristled. They shook their heads. No, they said. Not them. Never them. But the reporters kept writing. That was their work. The first rumor spread that very night. Someone claimed to have seen a strange car near the farmhouse days before. A dark sedan. Unfamiliar. Some said it was green, others black. Others insisted they had seen no car at all. But the rumor took root. Soon, everyone remembered seeing something, though none of their stories matched. The second rumor came from the edge of town. A drifter, a man with a scar across his cheek, had been seen at the diner, asking too many questions. Some swore he had been watching the Christiansens. Others said he was harmless, only looking for work. But his face was remembered, passed from one voice to another, growing sharper, darker, until it was the face of guilt itself. Deputies searched, but the man was gone. Maybe he had never been there at all. Inside the farmhouse, investigators found little. No forced entry, no valuables missing, No clear motive, but the violence was unmistakable. It was not quick, not clean. It was rage, sustained and deliberate. Whoever had come into that house had not come from money. He had come for something else. The sheriff knew it, felt it, in his bones. At the funeral, the church overflowed. People stood shoulder to shoulder, coats damp with melted snow. The coffins, 5 of them, were lined at the front, each one smaller than the last. The air smelled of pine from the wreaths, of wax from the candles. The preacher's voice trembled as he spoke of faith, of mystery, of trust in God's plan. But many in the room did not hear him. They were looking at the coffins, at the family wiped out in one night, and their thoughts were darker. Afterward, at the cemetery, the wind cut sharp across the fields. The ground was too hard to dig, so heaters were brought, machines that melted the frost and turned the earth soft enough to break. The sound of them roared over the prayers. It felt wrong to everyone there, machines cutting through silence. When the graves were finally filled, people left quickly, heads down, hands buried deep in pockets. No one lingered. No one wanted to stand too long in that place. In the weeks that followed, fear settled over the town like a second winter. Doors were locked earlier, curtains were drawn tight, strangers were eyed with suspicion. Children were kept close, their play shortened, their laughter quieter. In kitchens and living rooms, families spoke in whispers about the Christiansens. Some said the killer was still nearby, watching, waiting. Others said he had gone, that the family had been chosen at random, that it would never happen again. No one believed either story fully. The sheriff worked without rest. He drove to neighboring towns, questioning anyone who might have seen something. He sent deputies down highways, into taverns, into truck stops, asking about men who didn't belong. Files piled up in his office. Photographs, statements, scraps of evidence that led nowhere. He smoked more. He slept less. His wife said he had begun to carry the case like a sickness, heavy on his face, deep in his eyes. But there was something else. A letter. Weeks after the murders, the local paper received an envelope. Inside was a note, typed, with words uneven, letters struck harder in some places than others. It read, "You will never find me. Families like theirs are easy. They don't see me. They never will." There was no name, no address, only that message, cold and certain. The sheriff read it a dozen times. His deputies read it too. Some thought it was a hoax, a cruel trick. Others thought it was real, the voice of the killer himself. It was sent for a reason, they said, to mock, to remind, to tell the town that he was still out there, watching. The sheriff kept the letter in his desk, locked, but the knowledge of it spread. And with it, the fear deepened. Months passed, leads came and went. A man in Minnesota, arrested for assault, was questioned, but his alibi held. A hitchhiker in Illinois confessed to killings, but his story fell apart under questions. Each time hope rose, each time it broke. The case grew colder. The town grew weary. People wanted answers, but answers did not come. Still, the farmhouse stood, empty, windows dark, roof heavy with snow. People driving past would look at it, then quickly look away. Children dared each other to walk to the porch, to touch the door, to peer inside. Few ever did. The place felt wrong now, heavy with what had happened. A house can hold silence, but it can also hold memory. And that house held too much. By the end of the year, the Christiansens had become more than neighbors,
more than a family lost. They had become a story, a warning. Their names spoken with care, their deaths with fear. The case files grew dusty, but the memory did not. In kitchens and in taverns, people still asked the same question. Who did this? And somewhere, maybe near, maybe far, someone knew the answer. Someone carried the truth, quiet as the snow falling on fields.
The winter passed into spring, but the case did not thaw. The snow melted, the fields turned soft again, the rivers swelled and carried ice downstream, but in the sheriff's office, the files stayed cold. Larson read them over and over, as though the words might change, as though some clue might rise from the paper the way grass pushed through thawed soil, but nothing came. The farmhouse stood empty. Boards were nailed across the windows. The grass grew long around it, then was cut short again by neighbors who could not stand the sight of neglect. Still, the house seemed to sag, as if it knew. At night, when the wind pressed through the trees, it creaked in ways that made people cross themselves and walk faster. No one wanted to live there. No one asked to buy it. It was not a home anymore. It was a grave. Larson kept hunting. He followed a lead to Milwaukee, another to Chicago. Each one was thin. A rumor stretched too far. A man with the wrong face, the wrong timing. He drove back from each trip with the road unspooling in front of him, headlights cutting through dark, and the weight of failure pressing his shoulders into the seat. His wife said little. She knew there was no comfort she could give. He belonged to the case now more than he belonged to her. The FBI took an interest by summer. A family wiped out in their beds. Such things were rare, too rare to ignore. Agents came, suits neat, shoes polished, briefcases clicking open on desks. They asked questions already asked. They took copies of photographs already taken. They drew lines on maps, connecting dots that did not meet. Then, just as quickly, they left. They had other cases, bigger cases, cases with answers. The Christiansens remained behind. The letter lingered. The sheriff had shown it to the agents, but they had shrugged. Without more, it was nothing but a taunt. Maybe real, maybe not. But Larson could not forget the words. Families like theirs are easy. He thought about Ellen tucking her children into bed. He thought about Harold locking the door at night, certain it was enough. Easy, the letter said. Easy. The thought hollowed him out. In August, another letter arrived. This one not to the paper, but to the sheriff's office directly. It was shorter. Just one line. You still look, but I still walk. The envelope was plain. The postmark smeared. No fingerprints. No mistakes. Larson read it once, then again, then again. He put it in the same drawer as the first, locked tight. He told no one but his deputies. Still, somehow, the town knew within a week. Fear had a way of leaking, of traveling faster than truth.
By fall, the case had settled into silence. No new leads. No suspects. Only questions. The townspeople adjusting, as people always do. They went back to work, back to school, back to church. But something had shifted. Locking doors was no longer habit, it was ritual. Windows were checked twice, sometimes 3 times. Children were called inside before dark. A shadow had stretched itself across the town, and though the days grew shorter, the shadow remained the same length. Years passed. The sheriff grew older, his hair thinning, his back bent. He kept the files close, even when he knew they would not open again. He carried the case in his silence, in the way he paused when driving past the farmhouse, in the way he started smoking again after a decade without. His deputies spoke less of it, the new ones hardly at all. The Christiansens had become a story for them, a thing from before their time, like an old scar. But for the families who had buried them, it was not past. It was always present. Birthdays came, and there were no candles. Christmas came, and there were no stockings. The graves stood in a row at the cemetery, stones weathering under sun and snow, names slowly fading, but never forgotten. People left flowers, sometimes toys, sometimes just stood in silence. The space they left behind was too large to fill. The farmhouse finally fell. A storm tore part of the roof away, rain soaked through, walls sagged. It was demolished quietly, no ceremony, just machines grinding it down into boards and dust. For a time, the lot stood empty, grass pushing up where the house had been. Later, a new home was built, smaller, brighter, with paint that shone fresh under the sun. But those who lived nearby still said, when giving directions, "It's just past the Christiansen's place." The land remembered, even when the house was gone. Larson died with the case still open. In his desk, his children found the 2 letters, brittle with age. They handed them over to the archives, where they sat among other unsolved crimes. Words with no faces, threats with no name. The case was never closed. It was never solved.
And yet, the story lived on, in whispered warnings, in the way mothers drew their children close at night, in the way men eyed strangers at the edge of town, in the way silence fell whenever the name was spoken. The Christiansens were gone, but the shadow they left never lifted. Perhaps that was the killer's victory. Not the act itself, but the weight it left behind. The way it shaped a town, bent it, made it smaller, more afraid. Families like theirs are easy, the letter had said. Maybe it was true. Or maybe it was only true once. The people did not forget. The people would not forget. And somewhere, whether near or far, the one who had walked into that farmhouse on a frozen night carried the memory too, carried it alone, carried it always.